Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to Racism Demands Action in Education. This is the third in a series of Racism Demands Action town halls that are being sponsored by the Coalition to Unite Teaneck. And we are in webinar format tonight. So audience members, you are all muted and you should be able to see the panelists on your screen, but we cannot see you. If you pose a question in the chat, we may not get to address it, but we will definitely save the chat and follow up and attempt to get answers for you following the town hall, and the coalition will share that information. My name is Mary Joyce Lockey. I am a Teaneck High School teacher and I represent the Anti-Racist Alliance of Bergen County Educators. And since tonight's forum is about the system of education, we were very happy to partner with the coalition for tonight's event. So to everybody sharing virtual space with us tonight, this is about the power of the people to organize, to learn to recognize and interrupt patterns of oppression that show up in school systems, no matter what school district you're in. So thank you everyone for being here with us tonight. Let us give a gratitude and honoring to the Lenape people. Those of us in Bergen County, we occupy Lenape-Hoking, and we are on stolen land that continues to be exploited for water and resources by the settler colonial system. In the last few years, local groups, including the Ramapo Lenape, have been defending the land over a proposal to lay an oil pipeline from Linden, New Jersey, all the way to Albany, New York. And so I offer this land acknowledgement as a living one, where we as institutions and organizations engage with original people and ask permission to be led into alignment with that land acknowledgement, to create land equity and to push against erasure. And so some incredible members of our Teaneck community are here tonight and will be in conversation with a dynamic lineup of speakers, educators, scholars, activists, anti-racist organizers. First, we're going to hear from Tanya Breland from the New Jersey Department of Education, followed by Dr. Pedro Noguera, who is the Dean at USC's School of Education. We will then have our final segment with Dr. Okaikor Ai Price of EduSage, and from the New Jersey Education Association, Gabriel Tanglao and Amanda Adams. Thank you everybody for being here. We were very intentional about how we organized this webinar tonight, so we hope to model for the community what it means to be in an intergenerational space, sharing power and collectivizing wisdom. So again, thank you to all the speakers and moderators for holding space and giving your time and energy for us tonight. I would also like to shout out my co-organizers, Shanaz and Alexandra. I appreciate you both. And tonight's discussion has been formatted around the work of the Beyond Diversity Committee, who has sustained organizing in the Teaneck Public Schools around equity, access, and justice. Beyond Diversity's work really is for the school community and by the school community. And we have an active proposal on the table with the Teaneck School District. So tonight we're here to unpack what has been referred to as the educational survival complex, right? So we want to name the challenges that show up in education, build solutions together, and really demand action for transformational change. And so we want to acknowledge the local Teaneck school leadership that were able to join us tonight in the audience, who are listening and supporting the demands and the needs of our community. So we know that Nina Odatala, Enoch Nyamiki, Rolando Montserrat, Jasmine Roger DePara, David Murphy, and Ramon Ortiz were able to join us tonight. Dr. Irving also indicated he will join us after another town hall ends. We also have Board of Education members, Victoria Fisher, Denise Sanders, Sarah Rappaport, Sebastian Rodriguez, Clara Williams, and Linda Burns. So thank you all for being in community with us tonight. And certainly any other leaders that we know are joining us later, we will acknowledge them at the end. So to kick off our town hall, we wanted to lift up a young Teaneck voice. So if we can welcome Brianna, she's a rising 8th grader at Thomas Jefferson Middle School. Hi, Brianna, you can unmute.
Hi, my name is Brianna. I'm 13 years old. I'm 13 years old and a person of color. In the month of July, I was in a summer program, and my teacher, Miss Connors, told us to write something about change. Everything came up to learning how to write an argumentative essay. While a lot of things were happening, I thought I could write about racism because it is one of the main topics they were saying on the news. I knew the topic of racism is a serious and needed to change. When I was in school, my social studies teacher, Mr. Holly, had us do a project, and he told us that everybody has a story. The essay did come did came from my heart and what I heard from the news, and the news did make me pay attention to it.
Thank you so much, Brianna, for opening up our town hall. And we would love to hear a portion of your essay.
Okay. Racism is a hard topic to discuss. It is something that has existed for a very long time. Some people don't really think about these things. It is scary, but it happens. Everyone should have an interest in racism. When people are aware of racism, they can learn to treat others that don't look like them with respect. Most people never want to think about it. It is scary. People can judge you for something for no reason, and it is because they're being racist. Racism is a situation where someone can lose their life. When people don't have time to talk about racism, these things happen. We as people should work together because it is wrong to treat others with disrespect. Some people don't think we should talk about racism. It makes people feel uncomfortable and sorry for themselves. It makes people feel like they can't do anything about it. To make things better, we as people should protest, listen to others' opinion, and learn each other's history. We shouldn't stay in silence, and we all have a voice, and we all should use it.
Thank you, Brianna. So thank you so much, Brianna, for those powerful words. And folks, this is our call to action, right? So tonight, we're gonna start off with Tanya Breland from the New Jersey Department of Education, and we're gonna hand it off to Jay Sobers and Yusra Subani. And Jay is one of the founders of Black Lives Matter Bergen County. She is a leader of Black Affinity and several diversity conferences and clubs at Dwight Englewood. And Yusra Subani currently attends BCC. She's a recent graduate of Teaneck High School, where she was a member of the Beyond Diversity Committee. And I'm very excited to announce that she's running for the Teaneck Board of Education. So take it away, Jay and Yusra.
Welcome, everyone. Today we have a special guest, Tanya Berlin from the New Jersey Department of Education. She is the Director of the Office of Professional Learning. Now, Tanya, can you tell us a little bit about what the New Jersey Department of Education does?
Yes, first I want to just say thank you for having me this evening. And also I wanted to commend Brianna for using her voice to take action, especially around this very difficult topic for some people to talk about, racism. So thank you, Brianna, for just sharing your essay with us, a portion of your essay with us, and just for you taking a stance and representing your peers on today's panel. So kudos to you. And then also kudos to the other panelists and Yusra and Jay, who I'm looking forward to sharing. So your question was about the Department of Education. We are a regulatory organization or a governmental agency, and we set policy around education, various educational topics. We also provide some funding, and we monitor districts, making sure that they are compliant with the regulations that are required of them, or the policies that are required for them to fulfill in their districts. We also support districts, and that was something that was very important to our previous commissioner, Dr. Repillette, who was the first Black Commissioner of Education for the state of New Jersey. And he was very, he felt very strongly that not only should we regulate, but we should support. And so we have also taken that stance as well. So I think that kind of explains what the department is.
And what's your role in the department? What are you specifically capable of?
Thank you. I am the director for the Office of Professional Learning, but I also lead a lot of the equity work that happens out of the Department of Education, and I can share some of it as we go along. I was fortunate last week to be able to host in the middle of a hurricane, or I think it was a tropical storm by the time it got to New Jersey, our second statewide equity conference, where we heard from educators and students from across the state of New Jersey who offered workshops and led conversations specific to equity. A number of those conversations were related specifically to race. So I'm excited about the work that I do. It's really important work. And I'm hoping that we really can make a difference in what happens in schools for students.
So, hi, I'm Jay. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the diversity, equity conference that you just mentioned. So I know that this has been a statewide conference for the past 2 years or so. I wanted to know how these conferences came about and what exactly happens there. What are these specific workshops and what are the goals or the impacts and accomplishments that have come from these workshops and this conference over the past 2 years?
Sure. So last year we launched the conference and hosted it at the College of New Jersey, TCNJ. And it was an opportunity for us to shine a light on the work that was happening around the state of New Jersey with educators and students. We had over 1,000 people to attend. It was the first time we had done anything on that level. But ultimately, we were really looking to start a conversation. So last year's focus was equity for all. This year's focus was equity in action. So when we learned that we had to shift to a virtual conference, we realized that people sit in front of screens all day long. And so we had to come up with a way to be able to engage the educators and students and parents and others who were attending, and decided we would use an unconference model which would encourage dialogue about various topics. So the topics range anywhere from, and this includes last year as well, range anywhere from courageous conversations about race to how we can best meet the needs of English language learners, to how we can support LGBTQ students, how we can best meet the needs of our special education population. There were conversations, that they were very diverse. So there were a lot of different conversations. All of the topics were decided by the presenters. And this year we called our presenters facilitators because they really facilitated conversations about their various topics. We had students to talk about the Anti-Defamation League and their work in the Anti-Defamation League. We had students to talk about some of the other equity work that they're doing in their schools, as well as educators, leaders, school leaders, and other people who are particularly interested in creating equitable environments for all students to feel included in the school environment, to feel like they belong in the school environment, and to help them feel like they can thrive and be successful. And that's really what we want. We really want all students to feel like school is a place for them, that they are welcome there, that they are represented in the curriculum, that they're represented, and I know we'll probably talk a little bit more about that, but that's something that students are looking for, and that's something we were really trying to help educators do a better job at being able to meet all of our students' needs.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask 1.5 more questions about that. Sure. So I wanted to know, is it required for teachers from all over the state to go, or is it sort of like an optional thing?
It's absolutely optional, and it was open to any educator who was interested in attending. So they may or may not have been teachers. Some may have been administrators, school-based administrators like principals and vice principals. Some may have been assistant superintendents or supervisors or school nurses or school librarians. There was a wide range. We had parents who attended. We had Board of Education members who attended, and probably more people than I'm thinking of right now off the top of my head. But it was not required at all. People had the option to attend if they were available and if they were interested.
Okay, so I wanted to know, since this has only been going on for the past 2 years, are there any plans in the future to make this more of a, I guess the only word I could think of is requirement, so that people who actually have to go and like learn these things that need like to change the way that they're teaching in the classroom to actually attend? And will there be an opportunity for students, especially the students of the schools that are going to these conferences, to provide input? Because I know that like while at the conference you may be covering A through Y, I really need in my school letter Z to be represented to the faculty and staff. So are there any plans in the future, or is there like anywhere where we can like give public input, like a website or something, to talk more about these conferences in like the public setting?
Sure. So our hope is that we can continue with the conference each year. Because we're in the middle of a pandemic, it's a little bit challenging right now to know exactly what the future holds, but our goal is to be able to offer this conference every single year. Making it mandatory is a little bit difficult because we've been offering it during the summer and school's not in session in the summer. So people who attend actually attend because they want to attend, and then they take it back to their districts. And what we also did last year was we partnered with 3 universities, Kane University, the College of New Jersey, and Rowan University, because each of them were in the 3 regions of New Jersey, the North, Central, and South. And they actually brought educators from their regions to work with them all year round to look at specific equity focused topics. So they might have been looking at like culturally responsive practices or disproportionality with discipline, or disproportionality with special education, and other topics, around the opportunity gap. Those are some other topics. And they actually spent the entirety of the school year meeting and learning from one another. And then they also shared this year, and these were educators from various school districts. And some districts shared some of the work that they're doing to make their schools more equitable. So for example, some districts have they have committees and teams that actually work towards making the schools more equitable. So they look at some of the problems, they look at some of the data, and then they determine what their priorities are and what their game plan is. And so we were really encouraging people that, when they attended this year, that they not just attend to gain knowledge, but they attend so that they can go back and do this work. We would love to have more students included in the conference. It's a little difficult again because it's in the middle of the summer, and many students are not interested in attending conferences in the middle of the summer, but any student that is interested we'd be more than happy to have them. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
It's great to hear that so many people are willing to go to conferences like this and want to start this conversation. So I'm glad that there has been such a great turnout. Now I want to talk a little bit about the history of schooling in America.
Yes.
In America has never really been designed for liberation. We've had the Native American forced assimilation schools, which stripped children of their families and their culture. And we had children sent to work in factories and were taught to be compliant and obedient without any access to education. And now we have public school funding, which is based off of property tax, which leaves schools underfunded and opportunities that students have a right to stolen from them. Can you speak to us about the realities of some of these oppressive structural inequalities that are baked into educational institutions?
Sure, I can try to. You're absolutely right. We've had a lot of inequities, and when we look at the history of schooling in our country, we can go all the way back to Plessy versus Ferguson, where it was separate but equal. And that really was not the reality. The reality was funding did not go to schools where students of color attended. And we still see, under-resourced schools in communities all across our country, quite honestly. And this is an issue that makes it very difficult for students to have access to the same opportunities that perhaps their white peers might have in other districts that are not under-resourced. So you really bring up a really valid point, and that's something that that I'm also studying. I'm working on my doctorate and studying some of these same issues right now. But as we look at some of the challenges that schools have had and some of the inequities that have existed, some of those things include, how, where students come from. For example, some of it is outside of the school purview, but it contributes to the inequities. For example, where people live. And I think you referenced that, for years there was redlining, and people of color were not allowed to live in certain areas in certain communities. And, they lived in areas that were more impoverished and, again, under-resourced. And those communities did not have the same levels of resources in their schools. This still exists today in our state and in many states across this country. And the under-resourced communities leave students at a disadvantage in so many ways. There are things like limited health care, and, and in the communities, you don't see services that may be in wealthier communities, and access to various opportunities. Same thing happens in schools. We have this model in a lot of communities of neighborhood schools. And depending on where your neighborhood is, that may then dictate the quality of the schools that you have. It's not uncommon to see the inexperienced teachers working with the students who have the greatest needs. And, we see a lot of disproportionality in the way that schools operate. We see disproportionality in discipline data, in the representation of the underrepresentation of students of color in gifted and talented. Tracking was a big issue, has been a big issue. A number of schools have detracked, and a number of schools have made efforts to do that. But we know that there are schools that still, track students, and that students of color are not represented in honors classes and gifted and talented and AP courses, and students of color are overrepresented in special education. We see disparities in discipline and how discipline happens in schools. You've probably heard about the school to prison pipeline, and students of color are often overrepresented as students who are overly disciplined, if you will. And so there are a lot of inequities. And then we can talk about the curriculum, and how the curriculum does not reflect the diversity, or the teaching staff does not reflect the diversity of the student body. And so all of these things contribute to inequities that make it difficult for students to be as successful as we would want them to be. And those are kind of structures that we have to dismantle and that we have to disrupt, and be willing to do that and take and stand and push back against individuals who are like, let's leave it how it is. It's working fine. This is how we like it. Because there are people in communities that don't want change. They don't want to see, more integrated schools. They don't want to see, they feel that if resources are moved around, for example, that perhaps it means that their students will get less, and, students of color, for example, may get more, and that's just not, fair practice. So there's a lot of work that we have to do, not just in New Jersey, but across the entire country, to change what schooling looks like.
Yeah, 100. Like, I completely agree with that. And going back to what Yusra said about the past, and like how the past of schooling affects the future of schooling, I kind of wanted to ask you about like the next steps and stuff. So she mentioned that there, during colonization, when they were integrating Native Americans into school systems, they stripped them of their culture and they forced them to assimilate to the right culture, which is also known as like white culture and Eurocentrism, the whole thing. So I wanted to ask, about the lasting effects of that and what nuances you see. Because I know that when I look at the current education system in America, there are plenty of examples of cultural erasure, like the dismantling of AAV, African American vernacular, and teaching white American English instead of teaching people about all the different dialects of English, the Crown Act, which was the law that banned discrimination on hair texture, specifically towards African Americans and Black people. So there's obviously still traces of this whitewashing in the education system. And I wanted to know what nuances you have personally seen and how you and the Department of Education for New Jersey plans to dismantle this over the next 2 to 3 years.
So dismantling over the next 2 to 3 years is ambitious because we're talking about, you know, decades upon decades of these issues, if you will. And you brought up so many different issues. I'm trying to think of which one I should tackle first. But you know, a lot of the challenges that we're seeing, you're absolutely right about. I just had a conversation, I want to say maybe Monday or Tuesday, with an alum from a district here in New Jersey, a wealthy white district. And this was an alum of color who single-handedly was going into her school district, her former school district, to be able to tackle the issues that she saw as a student, feeling like she left underprepared in that she did not learn her history while in school, and that students of color were often not often made to not feel included and were othered in so many ways. And so she reached out because she was interested in, you know, how she could approach her school district. I absolutely had to applaud her because she was going in to meet with all of the leadership. She had had a meeting with the mayor, and she was doing this by herself. Of course, I encouraged her to, you know, find collaborators so that, you know, they can create some community engagement around some of the issues that she wanted to tackle within her previous district. But these are the kinds of things that, you know, when I hear about these types of situations, I want to encourage, especially our young people, to let their voices be heard when it comes to the inequities. I'm a strong believer that we can dismantle and we can disrupt the inequities that exist in school. But I also believe that it takes some committed individuals who are willing to look at themselves, look at their biases, look at the structures that they have in place, the policies and the practices that might be unfair or biased against students of color. And I challenge them to disrupt them, to change them. So I work with principals across the state of New Jersey. I have a principal learning network, and we focused the last couple of years on equity and helping principals to be able to look at their policies, like how are they addressing discipline, how are they addressing attendance, how are they addressing the dress code, and looking at how those things might be biased against students of color, or maybe biased against LGBTQ students, or how they may be biased against students who are English language learners, or students who are in special education. Like, we're really trying to help broaden the perspective and open eyes of individuals in school districts to really be able to see where they have and continue to contribute to the inequities that have been addressed, or that have been that we know about and that we know exist in our school systems. I don't know if I answered fully your question. It was an expansive question, but feel free to follow up.
So we talked a little about the Eurocentric curriculum that we have. Personally, I remember being in high school and sitting in my senior literature class, frustrated that I have to keep reading the same books written by these white men. And though I can only remember once reading a book written by a woman of color. Can you share with the audience what it means to adopt inclusive, cultural, relevant, sustaining pedagogy and frameworks?
Yeah, I think that's really important. You're absolutely right. We, for many years, and same thing for when I was a student in school, a lot of the literature that we read was written by white men. And students need to see themselves in the materials and the books that we read, that they read. And I think it's very important that, and I feel like that's the low-hanging fruit for districts, for schools. So they can easily go and look on the shelves of their libraries and their classroom libraries, and they can look at the books that are there, and that's something that they can easily change and expose students to, authors that look like them, authors that tell stories that reflect their communities and their religious backgrounds and, their experiences. And so, when I have these conversations, for example, with the principals that I might work with, that would be something that they can do immediately, quickly, even like they can look at their materials, they can address this. But when we talk about being culturally relevant, that's a process as well. And that process, a lot of times when people think about, okay, well, we're going to be culturally responsive, like we're going to have a culturally responsive program. Cultural responsiveness is not a program. It's really, I would say, a way of existing as a school system where students are respected as learners, all students, that they're seen as intellectuals, and that education is brought to them in a way that they are included and they feel like they're included in the learning process and that they are challenged. In a culturally responsive environment, you're going to see that pushback against the narrative that we've heard about, students of color. I was doing a training earlier this week with a school district, and I asked them the question, what are some of the narratives that you've heard about students of color? And they, on the chat, you started seeing, tons and tons of comments like, students are lazy, and they talk about the families. It was this whole list that they've heard about students of color. And it's not necessarily what they believe, but it's what they've heard growing up, some of their own personal experiences. I experienced racism as early as 7 years old as a student. And I didn't know it was racism because I didn't have the language to be able to express that's what it was. But students know when they're not included. They know when they are othered in a school environment. We really have to look at how schools wound students. And if I also ask that question a lot of times with educators, I ask because it causes them to have to reflect. How were you wounded by school? And when they start thinking about, especially educators of color, when they start thinking and sharing their stories, those who are not educators of color, also have experiences where they may have been wounded, but it causes them to have to really think about what they do to students. Because you reflect on how things happen to you, it kind of then causes you to have to think about what environment are you creating for students. So when we're talking about being culturally responsive, we really are talking about the type of environment that we create for students, the relationships that we build with students, the way that we include them in our curriculum and in our instruction and in the learning experiences that they have, and that we treat them in a manner that makes them feel that that they not only belong, but that they are a part of this community of learners. Educators who are culturally responsive are willing to confront their bias. And we all have biases. We just sometimes pretend like we don't have them, or we ignore them, or whatever. But it's important that we, as educators, be willing to confront those biases, to not be colorblind. I still hear educators today say, I don't see color. And then I say to them, well, when you don't see color, you don't see me. Because I am a woman of color, and I know that when I walk into a room, you see my color. So don't pretend like you don't. And I think we have to do the same thing with students. We can't be colorblind. I see that as not being inclusive of students, and basically ignoring who students are and the identities that they carry when they come into our schools and into our classrooms.
You made some very great points. Thank you so much for that. I wanted to ask you another question about, I know that we've taken steps towards diversifying our curriculum with the curriculum and the LGBTQ and people with disabilities curriculum. Can you just talk about a little about how that came to be and how like what are the levels of accountability for districts that don't implement this?
I can talk a little bit about that. It's not necessarily in my purview of responsibility at the Department of Ed, but we do have the Amistad Commission, the Holocaust Commission, and school districts are required to implement that curriculum throughout the course of the school year, not just during one time of the year or designated period. And it should be throughout all grade levels, and it should be developmentally appropriate. And we now have it where they are held accountable. Every district has to go through an accountability process every 3 years. And that's now included in the process. We've recently passed policy around including LGBTQ and the contributions where educators have to teach the contributions of individuals who are LGBTQ and as well as individuals who have disabilities. And so, I know that districts are looking to find curriculum or to build and develop curriculum where they are including, people from all walks of life in their curriculum. And it's very important that they do because students reflect those, all the individuals that I just mentioned. And students, again, like I said, need to see themselves in the curriculum. And it's important not just that students see themselves, but even if it's not like, here, I'm a Black woman, as a student, I would have loved to have read, about Black authors. But it's also important for me to read about Latinx authors and, authors of other backgrounds and religious backgrounds and other identities. That's important for all of us. It's inclusive, and we learn when we learn from one another, and it's really important, I think, that we learn from each other in our world is made up of diverse people, and we can't ignore that. So that's very important to me, and it's also important to a whole lot of people as well.
Right, and about the policy that you mentioned, would you consider this sort of like a self-assessment for the institutions to like hold them accountable for what they are teaching and when? And where can we find more information about this policy? Is there a website or something you can direct us to? Or
you can find all of that on the Department of Education's website. So you can start by looking at nj.gov /education, and that gives you access to all of the information related to any of the topics that we just discussed. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and that in this policy, just to be clear, it's a way of holding schools accountable for teaching different identities in the curriculum, like incorporating different identities into the learning curve and stuff?
It's about helping students to understand the contributions that people from different identities have made to society.
And this is a requirement in schools to like fill a certain amount. And when was this enacted, like ish?
just actually the Holocaust and Amistad have been around for a number of years. And most recently it was passed in regulations for the LGBT and students with individuals with disabilities, that information to be shared with students as well. So that's current. It's very, relatively new.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I want to thank you so much for being here today and discussing this with us. It was a really great opportunity. And I'd like to pass it all over to Russell Marsh, an educator and parent of Teaneck.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jay and Yusra. Excellent job, excellent questions. So I'll just do my my blurb now. I'm a part of the Beyond Diversity Committee, and I will give you a little intro about the Beyond Diversity Committee. The Beyond Diversity Committee is a multi-generational grassroots organization consisting of volunteers from the Teaneck community. We've held meetings over the past year and a half. This action-oriented group met regularly, and during our meetings, we collected data from our own community, shared the most up-to-date evidence-based research involving equity and social justice. our jobs were to look at the latest statistics and how it can inform the work that we're doing. Our work is rooted in our passion for social justice and our scholarship. We believe this working model can be replicated in any other community. The results of this hard work over this past year and a half is a proposal that was sent to the board. And now we'll watch a clip from part of our proposal.
Thank you for your patience. I'm just figuring out the audio. Give me one. So this need for an Office of Equity, Access, and Justice is not an indictment of any one individual in the Teaneck Public Schools, but it is an indictment of the system of institutional oppression. And no school district is immune. Systemic racism and bias are so deeply rooted in the DNA of our country's institutions that they become normalized and invisibilized into the status quo. Structural inequities that were in place before the pandemic create the underlying conditions for folks to be made vulnerable by limiting their access to opportunity, to resources, and to the ability to thrive. Environmental racism and redlining alone contribute to poor health and lack of access to space, clean air, and water. The income and wealth gap contributes to the lack of quality healthcare and the digital divide. Within those boundaries, people are made to be vulnerable, and COVID-19 has simply made it more visible. Now systems are forced to confront it. This public health crisis has shown us that it is possible for boundaries to dissolve and to prompt the reimagining of new ways of functioning. An Office of Equity would be an anchor for us to recognize and learn to interrupt patterns of oppression so we as a system do not contribute to the harm and trauma. Establishing this infrastructure is a way to be proactive about self-correction and confronting new truths.
What is disproportionality and how might it show up in our schools? Disproportional outcomes are the gap between a particular student outcome and its relationship to a particular student group. So if you have, for example, let's say 30% of your students are Black students, but 60% of discipline infractions are Black students, you would say that that's a disproportionate outcome. Mm-hmm. When we look at disproportionality, we look at it in multiple parts of our school process. And Teaneck has done a lot of work to understand its disparity patterns from the Noguera report in 2006 to the special education study in 2018. And we're going to look at some patterns. So in the Noguera Achievement Gap study in 2006, there were clear patterns of academic achievement gaps across race, gender, and socioeconomic status. One of the things that the Noguera report pointed out was students of color were underrepresented based upon their overall population of the community in gifted and talented, honors, and AP courses. 17.4% of the overall population had a special education classification. Fast forward to 2018, students with disabilities are 28, almost 29% of the Teaneck student population. Those numbers are extremely high compared to national averages. It's really important that we examine what the nature of the disparity is. There's one thing to know the disparity. There's another thing to understand what are the policies, practices, procedures, and beliefs that feed these patterns of disparity.
Thank you, MJ. Now I would like to pass over to a Teaneck parent. Santiago Taveras, who will be with our next panelist. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. Appreciate that. First of all, those young people that spoke make me so proud. They are just amazing. And Pedro, if you didn't get to see them, we had an 8th grader read part of her essay on racism. And then 2 young ladies, Jay and Yusra, take the New Jersey Department of Education Office of Professional Learning person to task, asking some very tough, pointed questions. And Tanya Breland, you did a great job trying to respond to these young ladies. So kudos to everybody. Thank you for having me. I have the pleasure to introduce a friend and a colleague that we've worked for. I just looked that up, Pedro. We've been working together for 19 years. Time flies. But Pedro Noguera, it is at the Emory Stoops Joyce King Stoops Dean, University of Southern California, the Rosier School for Education. He used to be a distinguished professor at UCLA, Grad School of Education, Center for Transformative Schools. He also was the executive director of the Metropolitan Center for Urban Education at the Steinhardt Grad School at NYU. He is the author of a few books, and I just want to mention 2 of them: Race, Equity, and Education, The Pursuit of Equality in Education 60 years after the Brown versus Board of Education, and Excellence Through Equity. Pedro, thank you again for joining and taking time from your very busy schedule. As you saw, the New Jersey, the Teaneck Department of Education, and actually a teacher, MJ, who put this together, is really pushing for an Office of Equity, Access, and Justice, which was the video clip that we just saw a little while ago, because it is important for us to tackle a lot of the points that you made in 2006 when you were part of a study of racism and inequity here in Teaneck. So if it's okay with you, we have 4 topics that we want to kind of talk about. The first one is about segregation and how some of the systems that are put in place in schools are still in place even 60 years plus after the Brown versus Board of Education. What are some of the things that you think schools need to change in the way they do business in order to support all of our kids, especially the ones that are constantly underrepresented in all of our schools across the nation, but here specifically talking about Teaneck?
Thanks for the question, Santi. It's good to be with you and good to be with parents and others in Teaneck talking about these issues. I'm not sure if Ms. Breland, who I was listening to, is the current superintendent, but if she is, you're lucky because she sounds like she knows what she's doing. Because that's been, I think, the big problem. If you don't mind, let me first go back in time to why we were invited in by the former superintendent, now deceased, John Saturco. Teaneck, like many districts around the country, had this huge gap in achievement. And they didn't know what to do about it. And so we said, let us come in, visit your schools, look at your systems, get into classrooms to understand what's producing these disparities. And the reason why we need to do the research is because those of you who've been in Teaneck for longer know Teaneck had once been an excellent school system. Teaneck was one of the first school systems in the country to integrated schools. I went to an Ivy League school, to Brown University, and there were several Teaneck students there then, Black students who came out of Teaneck. So Teaneck had a history of excellence. Question is, what happened? And I would say what happened is it got lazy. The system got lazy. You spend a lot of money on education in Teaneck. Money is not your problem. You spend more money in Teaneck than most schools in the United States. The big problem is that there is no accountability. There has not been fresh ideas in that system. The administration, I can't comment now because I haven't been there, but in the past, simple things like how to use data, how to support teachers in instruction were not happening in Teaneck. So my hope is that that's beginning to change. what I would caution you though, because you talked about creating a diversity and inclusion office. I don't think that's a good idea. And I'll tell you why. Unless that office has responsibility for every principal in the district, then it'll be powerless and nothing more than window dressing. The real work, the superintendent needs to be the diversity and inclusion officer, period. That's where the responsibility lies. And then every principal needs to be held accountable for making sure that teachers are teaching, kids are in their class, and that the nonsense that goes on in Teaneck stops. There's no reason. One of the things that used to really bother me when I would talk to some of the administrators and teachers in Teaneck is they would claim that the reason why achievement was so low is because you had too many kids sneaking across the bridge from the Bronx to go to school in Teaneck. And we said, how is this the case? And first of all, it costs so much to get across that bridge. What families are, now maybe there are some, but that's not the issue. That was an example of an attempt to deflect attention away from their own responsibility. So my strong advice, Santi, is don't fall for symbolic change. The real change, and you know this as an educator yourself, if teachers aren't teaching, if the school culture is not improved, nothing will change.
I absolutely agree with you. One of the things that was pointed out before is how do we have more culturally relevant curriculum in our schools? And you talked about the teachers taking that head on. As Deputy Chancellor in New York City, I started the Empowering Boys initiative, which was exactly about that. How do we make it relevant? One of the young ladies there talked about never learning about her own history and learning about the white history, the European history. And that's one of the things that I think you're correct, that we have to take ownership of it and inclusive of everyone and everybody's background so that the kids are more engaged in what's happening at the school. So do you want to say one last thing about that before we move on to the next topic? And I know we got 4, so I want to make sure we do justice for them.
Yeah, you know, I'm seeing in the chat room people saying, well, you know, Montclair had an equity office. You know, Montclair is a bad example to look to, okay? Because Montclair, even in a district like Montclair, I remember working with that district several years ago. They had Black children who were in special ed in the basement of the high school. You know, sometimes the ways in which kids are denied a basic education is obvious. And what disturbs me is that people who should know better do not call it out and do not insist that the children receive a decent education. You have everything you need in Teaneck to get this work done. What you lack, the parents need to stay involved. They need to hold that board accountable and the administrators need accountable. That's what needs to happen.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that we talked about in that last clip that you saw was using some of the data, and I don't want to get into specific data, but the data is not any different in Teaneck than other places where boys of color in particular are not in AP classes. Boys of color in particular are higher represented in special education. So we have all this data. How do you recommend Teaneck use this information in order to make change as opposed to just highlighting the obvious?
So the data you need to look at is the data that shows kids of color who are excelling, right? Because those kids exist in Teaneck too. Black, Latino kids who are excelling. And then we need to ask, what's different about those kids and their experience? Because what they're getting is what all kids need, right? So the answer is not in the data. The answer comes from the questions we pose about the data. So I would say, instead of Montclair, look at Union City, all right? Union City is 100% low income, 100% Latino, and has been a high performing district. Why can they educate kids in Union City, but they can't do it in Teaneck? This is nonsense. You know, I really, you gotta stop. Don't let people get distracted. We know how to educate kids. You can take some kids, you can take these same educators, I can name some schools in the Bronx they could visit where they would see a better education going on with much poorer kids. So let's stop the excuses.
You know, I love your passion because I met you in 2001 when I was principal of South Bronx High School. And my thing was, I don't want cops in the school. I don't want school safety dealing with my kids whatsoever, and doing restorative practices, right? So there was an example where a young lady didn't do her work. I forget what place it was in, but that she actually got arrested because she didn't get on her remote learning. And the judge thought that that was a violation of her probation. And I'm like, are you effing kidding me? Excuse me for the explicitive, but it's like, you have to make a place where the kids want to be there. So in that first meeting that you and I had, we had a group of kids that talked about exactly discipline and who's in the schools taking care of any issues that arise between kids. Talk to me about what would you want to see in place in a place like Teaneck to deal with discipline. What programs do you think should be implemented?
You know, again, you know this as well as I do, Santi. You visit, at least when we visited Teaneck High, what would outrage me is the number of kids roaming the halls. Adults wouldn't even tell them to go to class. You know what happens when adults don't tell the students to go to class? That kids think they don't need to go to class, that it's not important. So you had a very dysfunctional culture with very low expectations. That was the problem at Teaneck High, at least when we visited. Now, I hope it's improved, but my guess is it probably hasn't, because you would need a team to go in there and say, we are going to hold ourselves accountable for educating these children. And again, we have examples not far from Teaneck of how to do that. Don't believe the notion that something is wrong with the kids. What's wrong is the system that you have in Teaneck.
Yeah, going back to the discipline issue, and one of the things that I know that I grew up in Central Park Keys. I always say I grew up there because I learned a lot from
Debbie.
Just learning how Debbie Myers, as you know, right? And it was about how do you get to know the kid in order to support and help them be successful. I'm a big believer in the restorative practices and having meetings and getting to know each individual kid so that we can move forward. So what are some of the things that you have seen? I know that when you were in Oakland back then, I remember a story you told about the young man who was with the chains and all of that stuff, but you were able to engage him and make him a leader at the school as opposed to doing what he was doing before.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, again, getting to know the students, connecting with them, letting them know that we care so much that we want to see them in class, doing their work, because kids have to be held accountable too, right? Parents have to be held accountable. You have parents, see, because Teaneck is an affluent community. So you have college-educated parents in there who may not be doing their job to make sure their kids are doing their work. So it's not about finger pointing. It is about everyone accepting responsibility. Parents, kids, teachers, administrators, the school board, everybody has to have a common vision and be held accountable to doing the work. But if you want to look at discipline, then the main thing you have to focus on is school culture and the quality of relationships between the adults and the students. Where you see a strong and positive culture, you usually don't see many discipline problems.
Right, definitely. So one of the ways that this office that is being proposed, and maybe we just need to call out the different things that they want to be able to do. And I think some of these things you put in as suggestions when you made your reported your findings to Teaneck. So one of them is culturally responsive culture. That's one of the things that MJ and that team of Beyond Diversity wants to put forth. Is that one of the things that you think is will be helpful in moving the school forward? And I believe that the superintendent has to take the reins in that and help that become a reality, because it's, as a leader, I know that it starts with leadership.
Exactly. And so that's why I'm saying, don't put it in some kind of diversity office unless that office has power over curriculum and over what's happening in schools. You need the authority to execute change. People focus on the wrong things. A diversity office has no power unless principals have to report to them and they can hold them accountable. So yes, you need a curriculum that's responsive to the needs of kids. You need to make sure that the culture of the children is reflected in the curriculum. But you also need to make sure that the teachers know how to teach it. That is the hard work, right? Because even if you have a great curriculum, if you have teachers who are racist or who don't have low expectations, you could have a great curriculum, the teachers will undermine it. So you can't fixate on just one part of the puzzle. There are many pieces that have to come together to get better results.
Right. So the entire proposal of this Beyond Diversity proposal that MJ and some others here in Teaneck are trying to put forth is also has to do with what you just mentioned, the teachers and getting the teachers to buy in, but getting them not to buy in just to check a box and do the nodding, but to really understand the biases that we have, right? So in Cornell University, they have this program called Therapeutic Crisis Intervention. And one of the modules that they have is about biases that we have and that we grow up with. And in our kitchen table, sometimes we hear our uncle, somebody say things, and then we believe that they're true because it happened once and you believe it, right? So how do we help the staff learn about their own biases and be conscious about the choices and the words they choose when addressing our kids?
So you have to be careful with bias training also. And the reason why I say that is I have never seen a school get better because they did bias training. I've never seen it, right? Why? Because you have to connect that work to the practice, to what they're doing. How does it help me as a science teacher to teach my kids science or to math? You have to make it embedded in the subject matter. You have to give teachers guidance on how to build stronger relationships with students. If the bias training doesn't do those things, it's a waste of time. And in fact, you'll just piss off a bunch of white people. And now what do you have? A bunch of angry white people, and you're still not getting any better. So I've seen schools spend a whole lot of money on bias training, and I haven't seen the schools get better. New York City's doing it right now. And tell me, they're not focusing on the substance. These are distractions. Focus on the substance. What is the substance? Teaching and learning, leadership, school culture, parent involvement, student engagement. That's what you got to stay focused on.
Right. So another point of the Beyond Diversity proposal is to reconceptualize the foundation of the school's program, the use of faculty meetings, the use of the time that we have with the teachers and how to move them towards being inclusive and more knowing the needs of the kids and being able to meet the needs of the kids. What do you think about that part of that proposal?
I mean, it might be a good idea, but unless those ideas are embraced by people in leadership, they're not going to go anywhere. See, parents and the community can hold the district accountable and must, right? And keep close watch on what's happening. But ultimately, you need leaders who are going to carry through a change agenda and who will be held accountable by the community. The community can't do it by itself, right? You need educators.
I can't overemphasize that enough. In my 2 years at Cambridge Education as vice president of the East Coast, what I learned there is that unless everybody's on the same page, we don't move. That's and right. It was time and time again in the different school districts that I worked with to see that. The other part is special education and changing the culture of special education. You mentioned kids being in the basement in a particular high school in Montclair. What are some of the changes in special education that you think would be helpful for Teaneck and every school district in order to move forward?
Well, you know, think about it. When a child is identified as having need for special education, we diagnose the learning need, we come up with an individualized plan, right? As long as the plan is accurate, right? And that's a big qualifier because we know a lot of times kids are misdiagnosed and there's really nothing wrong with that child at all. They just haven't been taught. But there are real disabilities out there, then we have to make sure that there's follow through on that IEP, that the learning plan, if the learning plan is valid, then you need to make sure you have highly qualified teachers following that plan, meeting the needs of the students. You know special education is working when you see growth in kids, when you see kids are not being isolated and marginalized, and when you see that their needs are being met. That's what we should be focused on. But when special ed is being used as a place to put kids that we either don't want to serve or don't know how to serve, then what we see is it really contributes to the inequities in the system.
Yeah, I agree. My wife and I have a student, child who just graduated from Teaneck High School and actually graduated with in the honor roll. And but it was a lot of work to help him get through all of the challenges, right? So one of the other things that they want to also do is just in the lesson plan protocols, right? Because a lot of the lesson plans are cookie cutters that they just have been using for years. I always say that sometimes they just go to the file cabinet, oh, this is it, and they don't necessarily modify it. What do you think about some of the ways that we could help teachers prepare for lessons as opposed to just using something that they have done for years?
You know, again, this is why you need instructional leaders in Teaneck, teachers have to plan. I would go beyond that. They should plan together, right? They need to be clear. What are our students supposed to learn? How do we know if they've learned it, right? Focus on the evidence of learning. What do we do when they're not learning it? How do we intervene? Those kind of conversations need to happen in small professional learning communities. And then there needs to be follow through by leadership who are in classrooms, observing teachers, giving feedback. That's how schools improve, right? When we stay focused on the evidence of learning. And ultimately, without that, you're not going to get very far.
Okay. One last point is about hiring practices, right? So the faculty doesn't always reflect the population of schools, and not just in Teaneck, but all around the nation. What are some of the things you think we could do in order to attract staff members that look like the students that we have at our schools?
Well, it shouldn't be too hard because you pay well in Teaneck. You got good salaries in Teaneck. So what you need is to actively recruit. We got to go to the colleges in the area where there are students of color and start recruiting them early. I would say that we also need to look at even high schools where we are, think about teaching as a career and technical occupation. So we're introducing kids early in 9th grade, say, look, you could be a tutor, and working with them to think about teaching and education as a profession in the same ways we do in other fields, health careers, et cetera. So you absolutely need more teachers of color. The question is, are you building the pipeline to access them? But you're right, again, you're right across the bridge from New York City. There's a whole bunch of them right there.
Yeah, so one last thing, Pedro. This group, this Beyond Diversity group has been working very hard for years now, led by a teacher, a Teaneck teacher, and it includes students, not just graduates of Teaneck High School, but also students in the middle school of the Teaneck, and a lot of parents. I am very happy to have been invited to this group because often school districts forget about that, right? So you have teachers, kids, parents involved. What are some words of encouragement that you could give this group so that they continue the good fight that they have been doing for years, but make it that you think will be their dreams become a reality and that they could actually get this done?
So, you know, I want to commend you for including students, because students see things and experience things that a lot of times, if we are willing to listen, would tell us where the problems are. Right now, if you were to ask the kids, who are the teachers that challenge you? Where are you really learning? The kids will name which teachers. They will also tell you, this is where we're learning nothing at all. This is where there's disorganization and chaos, low expectations. It takes courage to listen to kids, because now that they've told you, you have a responsibility to do something about it. So I encourage you, keep listening to the kids, but then we have to act on what we hear. I was very impressed by the two young people you had on the panel earlier. They're clearly very smart and articulate, and they show us we have great talent in Teaneck. The problem is not the kids.
Yeah, I don't know if you got to the piece, but one of those young ladies, Yursa, is actually running for the Board of Education in Teaneck.
Excellent. Excellent. Maybe she can bring some change.
I hope so. My vote's for her, that's for sure. So, you know, I thank you for your time. I don't know if you're going to be able to continue to listen I really appreciate the time they took to join us here in Teaneck. And with that, I have to transition. Any last words before I transition to the next speakers?
I would just say, really encourage the listeners out there, stay involved. Don't treat this as a one-time thing. You know, I remember when we finished our report, we made a presentation to the community, maybe 150 people there at Teaneck High listened to a 2-hour presentation on our findings, and nothing happened. And I kept asking, why did nothing happen? And no one could tell me anything. So, you know, there's a lot of people responsible for inaction, not just the district leadership, the community itself. You put up with the nonsense going on in those schools. You pay too much in taxes to put up with it. You deserve better.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pedro. Good to see you.
Thank you, Santi.
Appreciate it.
Right.
So now I would like to introduce 2 young folks that are going to come up next. One of them is Muji Ali, who is a passionate Teaneck native. She owns Afro Twin Productions, a media company focused on authentically sharing the voice of BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, through the power of media. And the next young person is Christopher Darbasi. Is a Teaneck High School alum and New York City theater maker that centers the complex experiences of Blackness in their work. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having us tonight. I think that we are still trying to get the other panelists and speaker joined in the conversation at the moment.
Yes, thank you for your patience, everyone. We're about to bring on Dr. Okaikor Ayi-Price, Gabriel Tanglao, and Amanda Adams to this segment. And we're also going to move Muyi in from the attendee list. So just give us a moment. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, Big Santi.
Hello.
Shanaz, I think we moved to the wrong Amanda. We need Amanda Adams. Okay, I think we're all set. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all so much for your patience. And thank you so much, Pedro and Santi. That was an amazing conversation, and things were said that we really need to hear. And I believe that we're moving on to panelists who can appropriately discuss the next steps of what to do with the data collected by the Beyond Diversity Committee. So our panelists are Dr. Awo Okaikor Ayi-Price from EduSage, and Gabriel Tanglao and Amanda Adams from the NJEA. So if you guys don't mind, if you could take some time and just let us know what you do and what your efforts are to handle the system.
Mm-hmm. So yes, I'm Okaikor. I am a former classroom teacher. I'm no longer in the classroom. I am an organizer and just recently started my own business, EduSage, which stands for Sustaining Anti-Racist Grounded Education. And so, so a lot of my work is committed to all of this. And it's been the work that I've been doing all of my career for the most part, actually all of my life. People joke around. I have friends of mine that joke around and said, you used to be talking about this at 10 and 11 years old. And so that's just, just in a nutshell, the work I do. I'm also a core trainer with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And we do anti-racism training. Well, we do workshops, it's an experience. We do believe that it's just the planting of the seeds that leads to deep, continued, lifelong work that is rooted around core principles or anti-racist core principles, which I'll go in a little bit more detail as we get closer to that, but that's me.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Gabriel Tanglao, if you can let us know what you're about.
Thank you. Gabriel Tanglao. Before I go into my professional creds, I actually grew up in Bergen County. I grew up in Dumont, former teacher at Bergenfield High School. So that's where my roots are. And now I serve as Associate Director in Professional Development with the NJEA, which is the New Jersey Education Association. It's the state affiliate that represents K-12 teachers in public school and also education support professionals in public schools. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. We're so happy to have you. And Amanda Adams, please let us know.
Hi, thank you for having me. I was a elementary school teacher in East Orange, New Jersey for 20 years before I became an associate director in the professional development division at NJEA. My primary responsibilities are actually starting to coexist. One is as a coordinator of the Priority Schools Initiative that sends retired teachers as consultants into schools in need of improvement. That typically lands us in urban school districts and urban-like school districts. And I'm also a staff contact for the NJEA ACEs task force and a master ACE interface trainer. As is Gabe, we're working towards our master ACE interface training, and that work has consisted of training educators in all 21 counties around understanding trauma and its impact on our bodies and how to become self-healing communities. We have just established a cross-sector task force, so we are engaging with people in the medical profession, community organizers, social workers, the police force, the Department of Ed, et cetera, around how to become healing centered in their approaches to their clientele.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you. Thank you all so much for that amazing introduction and also for your amazing work. Chris is actually going to start us off with this discussion, but I look forward to all of your responses. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. So actually, right before we delve into questions, as we know, the theme of the town hall is racism demands action in education. So in the interest of shared vocabulary, shared language, I just want to sort of lay a foundation of what we define racism as, racism being racial prejudice plus institutional power. So can anyone put this definition into context and how that plays in the educational system?
Yeah, so I was on a call earlier today and people were often, they were throwing out, well, there's this whole debate because some authors are saying that, well, no, racism applies to anybody and everybody, right? And even a person of color can access power, right? Look at Barack Obama, right? He was the president of the United States. He had power, right? He could make decisions, he could do this. But we would differentiate that when we're talking about in the definition of racism as that being positional power, right? So when we're talking about power within the definition of racism as an ideology, as a structural system of oppression, we're saying that power is the historical and collective access to the systems sanctioned by the state, right? And so when we mean the collective, the historical and collective, so there's only one group of people that from the beginning of this country's foundation had historical, collective, and legitimate access to the institutions sanctioned by the state, that we define as power, right? Not positional power, but this is actually having, and I've got some illustrations here, we're doing a power analysis of looking at what are the institutions that were designed, that were created at the foundation of this country when it was constructing itself, right? After the Civil War, when it was constructing itself, it was putting in institutions, it was putting in structures in place. Who had access to those structures from the very beginning, right? Who was deemed to have access to those structures at the very beginning? Who has to fight for access to those systems and structures right now, right? And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about power, right? Which is very different from me as an individual being the principal or superintendent of a school because I'm a Black woman, I'm the face, right? I'm a Black woman, I'm in a position of power, but I as a collective with my people, we do not have access. We don't have collective access, right? And historical access, legitimate access, like that legal access to the system sanctioned by the state. And so what does that mean in the context of schooling, right? Who's had to fight to get into school? Who had to fight for a right to education? Who has to fight to get a quality education, right? It was Black and brown folks, other people of color who are fighting just for an education. That was a system that wasn't supposed to be for us, right? Which is why in many ways we were creating our own. I have a ladybug on my computer, sorry. And so when we're thinking about this in within our schools and other institutions, but particularly around schooling, we should be pretty much creating a system where people don't have to fight for the basics, right? Should be a human right. Right, that's what we need to do. We need to create systems where people are not fighting for that, and that's what we're here for.
No, I'm glad that you're mentioning systems that sort of create problems in these violences, right? And so we're talking about how racism is also a product of capitalism, is a product of white supremacy, it's a product of colonialization. But you also mentioned the institution versus the I. So how can we better differentiate institutional power versus what you mentioned as positional power?
Yeah, so the positional powers would be me having a position that in theory and in ideology has some power. Like, and then the example I gave was like, okay, even the Supreme Court judge, right? We've got Clarence Thomas, right? Who's a Black man, right? Who has positional power, but he's an individual. He's one individual person. Black people as a collective, other brown people as a collective, historically do not have that kind of collective power, right? And so these identities, even these identities I'm talking about, white and Black and Asian and Latinx, Hispanic, those are actually political identities. Those are political identifications. Like power, right? Being a white person means that it's a political identity. It's a direct access to that power. It positions you, right, in this country, worldwide, right? It positions you as being the height of humanity, you know, the model of human achievement, because that's what was constructed. That was what was created when they constructed this ideology of what race was and these specious classifications of what it meant to be white, what it meant to be Black, what it means to be Asian, what it means to be Latinx, Hispanic, all of that, right? So those are political identifications, all right? And so when they collectively have power, me as an individual, I don't have power. So I could easily be kicked off of my position. I could be easily fired. I could be easily demoted and promoted, like, or whatever, right? But as a collective, it doesn't work that way, right? So that's why we have to literally fight for these all these things that we're fighting for. That's the difference, is that there's you holding a position versus you having collective power and legitimate. So legitimate is that legal piece, is that legal power, right? When laws were created, they were created for white people, by white people, right? And that's what it was.
I just wanted to add something to that, to everything that Okaikor said is so on the nail. And that's why just putting a Black person in charge of a system that wasn't created for Black people doesn't change the system. right? So having President Barack Obama as a Black man did not change the systems, the institutional systems that have been put in place. That's why having Black police officers doesn't change policing, right? You're putting Black faces into systems that are meant to oppress people of color.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because especially in using terms of like diversity and how they're sort of synonymous with utopian, right? And how representation is sort of this gilded language of sort of offering solution without the actual structural change, whereas representation doesn't save people. And I want to make that leap based on that with also the term gatekeeping, right? And who gets to sort of be the ones to implement power and share power and resources and equity. So what does it mean to be a gatekeeper in a system like education? And I guess furthermore, what does it mean to be a transformational gatekeeper?
Yeah, so I want to actually engage you, Chris, in a conversation, because oftentimes when I talk about gatekeeping, I don't know, are you familiar with any of like the Marvel comics? Like, do you like Thor? I don't know if you ever
I've seen some of the Avenger movies when they came out for free on like HBO. But I was not lining up to go see them in the theaters, I'll be honest.
Okay, so in Thor, there's a character in Thor. I don't know if anyone else is familiar with this character, but Idris Elba plays him, and he's gatekeeper, right? And he literally stands at the gate, right? And we think about what a gatekeeper does. Like, what does a gatekeeper do? I'm engaging you, Chris, and
yeah, so they are sort of the person to allow or deny entry into something.
Yep, so they either allow or deny entry, right? Do they own the gate?
No, they essentially work for a higher system.
Yeah, so they don't own the gate, but they make the decisions about whether or not they allow people in, let people out, right? You know, how many they allow in at a time. You know, they are the ones who are they don't own the gate, right? So in many ways, we're all gatekeepers, right? We don't own the gate, but we'll let people in, deny people, let people out. You know, we make those decisions. So that's pretty much what a gatekeeper is. The gatekeeper is the one who controls the flow of access of knowledge, of information, can make decisions for, can interpret. In a school setting, who's one of the most powerful gatekeepers?
Yeah, superintendents, principals.
Well, actually, what do you, anybody think they might know?
Oh, I mean, I would give it to the teachers also.
Teachers are definitely, absolutely. And when you're walking into the school, when you walk into the office, who's there sitting at the desk?
Administrators.
Okay, administrators. Before you even get to the administrator, who's there?
I mean, it depends on the school. We had security guards, so.
Security guards, right? Secretaries, right? All of that. So they actually literally, the secretary could actually decide whether or not you are going to get a meeting with your administrator. They'll tell you, they'll decide whether they're going to put you on the agenda, on the calendar, or not put you on the calendar. But yet, they're probably one of the lowest paid people in the school. The custodians, they literally hold the keys to the school, right? Which means they could let you in, lock the door, let you out. They could decide whether or not they're going. So it has nothing to do with even how much money you make. It literally is for all of us. We're all gatekeepers. And what does it mean to be transformational gatekeepers? It means that we are opening the doors for everybody, right? We're opening access for everyone. Because right now, as it stands, this is what I call we have what we call an opportunity apartheid. Who is allowed access to opportunities? Which is why you can walk into a class that has different levels, and you can see based on the race of students who are represented in that class, what track that is. That's an opportunity apartheid. I am denying access to some of you. I'm separating some of you. Dr. Negrero talked about students being in the basement. Opportunity apartheid, literally built into the structure of schooling, right? Who makes the decisions to do that? right? They don't own the school, they don't own the district, but who's making the decisions to deny certain students access to opportunities, access to knowledge and knowledge creation, right? The ability to think beyond, the ability to create, the ability to see beyond their moment in time, right? Who is giving them those opportunities? Who deems whether or not they have those opportunities? Guidance counselors are often some of the biggest gatekeepers too as well. Oh, you can't go into the honors class. You're probably not ready for that, right? And so that when we're talking about gatekeeping, being a transformational gatekeepers, we're all the gatekeepers. But how are we accountable to community? How are we allowing access to all people, right? And not just denying and creating a structure where it builds into what we call an opportunity apartheid.
Yeah, that's important. I'm glad that you mentioned being a transformational gatekeeper, and meaning that it's opening the doors for everyone. That's such a good analogy to use, because earlier we were speaking about how schools are, or the school systems are not designed as liberating spaces. They seem to be places that reinforce patterns of oppression, and these patterns of oppression can come in the form of like dress codes or punishment enforcement in different ways, beyond like to colorism and going off to different things. But can you speak on some of those patterns of oppression and explain exactly what is a racial trauma? Whoever.
Yeah, Amanda.
Mm-hmm. So before we talk about what racial trauma looks like in school, I just want to quickly cover what trauma is and how it impacts us, very quickly. So the science behind trauma is that toxic stress generates predictable patterns in brain development. So when stress chemicals such as cortisol are elevated for long periods of time during the development of a child into an adult, they can be toxic to neurons. So neurons are the cells in your brain, right? And the connections between the neurons are actually what create, that help development around those experiences. So early experience causes the brain to adapt to what it predicts will be a dangerous or a calm world. All right, so early experience causes the brain to adapt to what it predicts will be a dangerous or a calm world. So by young adulthood, our bodies are interpreting information based on our past experiences. We essentially experience the world in very different ways. So for people who've experienced toxic stress during development, even a small amount of stress that can feel small to some can feel like an overwhelming crisis to others. Experience can be hardwired into our biology, which impacts our behavior, our affect, our mood, and not by choice. They may be a normal response to early adversity. So particularly for people who have experienced trauma, there's no such thing as maladaptive behavior. The way that our brain develops, our brains adapt so that our behaviors help us survive, right? So as we're thinking about this. Experience can shape the expression also of our genetic code, which effectively changes our cells' ability to read our genetic code. The chemical process that affects gene expression can be passed down from one generation to the next. Okay, so epigenetic adaptation to experience helps a species to survive. There is a great survival advantage to knowing about dangers without having to have direct personal experience. So let's think about that. How does that apply to racialized trauma, period, right? Kaikor did an excellent job around breaking down systems of power. So on that chart behind her, it demonstrates all the different institutions that exist in our communities, schools, right? Housing, healthcare, so on and so forth. Transportation, a lot of things, and lack of access to all of these things, right? So as Black people, poor, Black, indigenous people of color, experience lack of access over and over and over again to all of these institutions, less resources, etc. It impacts our experiences over a lifetime. And those experiences, due to lack of access and systems of oppression, actually impact the way that we grow up and how we react to the world, right? So if we think about a lot of the ways that Black people are characterized in this country, in this state, in schools, right? How Okaikor said, if you walk into a classroom and you look at the ethnic makeup of a class, you can determine what level that class is. Eventually, it gets internalized, right? So it gets internalized into our physical health, right? The coronavirus, that's a pure, clear example. Impacted Black and Latino families and communities more than any other race or culture in the country. There's a reason for that. Mental health issues. How often are Black men characterized as dangerous, Black women characterized as angry, etc.? When you are constantly being fed those messages over the course of generations and generations and generations, they can be internalized into anxiety, depression, right? And so let's walk into schools now. Brianna did an excellent job of framing actually the whole scope of what racialized trauma looks like in schools. It's a hard topic to discuss. So imagine walking into a school building where no one wants to acknowledge your race or your color. No one lifts you up as gifted or talented. There is a lacking of messages of hope. Someone can lose their lives. Imagine carrying the weight of that with you every day, even when you enter into a community institution as such as a public school, that you are in constant fear of your life and well-being, how that impacts how you show up into school buildings. She said it simply, it makes people feel uncomfortable and sorry for themselves. So when you are being given messages of your lack of worth, you internalize that with low self-worth. Tanya Breland gave us many examples of all of the structures within schools that continue to perpetuate those messages. Most inexperienced teachers work with the most challenging students. Tracking, overrepresentation in special ed, underrepresentation in gifted and talented honors and AP, the bias of teachers, disparities in discipline, school to prison pipeline, curriculum that lacks representation, staff that lacks representation, erasure of dialect, ban on, hairstyles. I'm sorry, did you hear that ding? I'm sorry, that was the text. And dress codes, etc. All of those things are compounding, right? The experiences of students of color, which impact them in ways that they don't necessarily know is happening. So when behaviors show up in schools, right, to educators that don't have a cultural understanding, don't have a trauma-informed lens through which they are showing up in schools, aren't considering the healing that needs to take place in order to be culturally responsive to students, these systems get perpetuated and they don't change. So very quickly, I wanted to just share that there were also some things that came up in Tanya's presentation around what we can do about it. Culturally responsive teaching is one of those things, considering how that it's not a program. Trauma-informed care is also not a program, right? It's the way that it's the lens that we look through as we consider all the policies, practices, rules, discipline, everything that take place in schools that we think about as we educate students. It's building relationships and a sense of hope in our students, with our students and of our students. It's developing a sense of belonging for students and a safety. Safety is not actually removing harm. It's actually, safety is your perception of well-being, right? Based on the environmental cues around you and the relationships that you have with people. An example of that is, aren't there certain people that you go to when you're highly stressed or you need help? Who is that one person you count on to talk to? You go to that person that you instantly relax around because they help you feel safe, right? How do we generate that sense of safety in our schools? And then also affirming culture, affirming the culture of our students, their language, their faith, their community identity, right? Their families. Students are attached to families, and far too often educators ignore the families that actually are their students, right? And we have education has moved into this space of becoming the professionals who want to give the answers rather than seeking out the answers from the community that they serve. And as far as students, some things to help with racialized trauma in school, I just want you to consider who your trusted circle is. Who's the trusted adults that you have in your life? How do you keep toxicity out of your circle, your friendships, your relationships? Intentionally turning off social media and the news and connecting with that trusted community instead. Use mindfulness. This is something that we really want to start to incorporate and drill into how schools are run. Taking time to pause. Very rarely do educators have a time to pause to even care for themselves. How often do educators have to even process their own trauma and secondary trauma that they bring? Right? As educators, we bring a worldview to our schools. There's no time to evaluate that. So we want to encourage our youth to do that as well. Exercise, use music and dance and the arts as an outlet to express yourself. And something that has come up over and over again with Tanya Breland, Pedro Noguera, come together, students, to study, to organize and act. Kai-Core gave me that cycle that I now is my mantra around everything. Study together how to change the system, organize together with your trusted adults, and act around the injustices that are at the root of your stress. And that is a pathway to hope and healing. Thank you
So much for just the expansiveness of that response. And
that was amazing.
I guess the ecosystem of care and education and how that's contingent upon solving and moving beyond racial trauma. I do want to switch gears for a second and also get to know you a little bit better. I want to discuss actionable solutions for combating institutional racism. And before getting to the crux or the axis of that, what is NJEA? What does it do? You have the beautiful background. Tell us more.
So NJEA is the state level teachers union. It's a democratic organization with which it comes all of its complexities, as most democracies do. So if I'm going to be 100% transparent, we are an organization that advocates for our members to improve economic conditions, working conditions, job security, and pensions. That's the historical foundation of what the organization is rooted on. And Gabe is going to talk more to this when coming up, but I just wanted to say that we are, as an organization, on a journey of considering how to organize for our members in a more holistic or a community-based way. It's a long journey, but we're on that journey to do that. So I'll leave it there. NJEA is the teachers union. It's a complex organization, and we're on a journey for, promoting more social, economic, and racial justice for our members.
Great. So then I'll toss it over to Gabe.
Yeah.
So what is NJE doing to self-assess its own organizing toward the social and racial justice that you speak of, Amanda?
Yeah, so just to offer a little more context about the organizational structure, because if we're going to change structures and systems, we need to understand some of the nuances. And Amanda talked about how NJEA is a state affiliate. There are layers and levels to our union from the local affiliates. So for every district, we have a local affiliate, county affiliate, state affiliate, and then a national affiliate. And I think that's important to name because it actually ties back to something that Okaikor was framing earlier about the culture of how racism and capitalism are connected. And when I say capitalism, we're talking about individualism, right? So how is individualism replicated in our systems? It's that positional power of individuals, right? A union, at the heart of it, is about collective uplift. Historically, unions are about improving working conditions and living conditions for a collective group of people. So the economic justice piece is embedded in the heart of that. And that's one of the things that's important to name. So that said, the complexities that exist, and I'm actually going to shift gears because I'm actually going to frame it more as my story and connect it to my own personal experience and journey. Being a teacher in Bergenfield High School in 2010, one of the things that I was deeply passionate about was the curriculum. And I think my focus in education didn't allow me to take a look at what are the opportunities to get involved in the association until later on in my career. But once I started to take a look at some of the opportunities, and what I mean by opportunities is opportunities to serve and lead within the association, I recognize that white supremacy patriarchy exists in all organizations, in all institutions, right? Those are something that's embedded in the core and the culture that's reflected in schools, as we've been describing, and that also exists in associations and organizations. It's not too different, but the opportunity to organize within a democratic institution and try to squat up, build collective power, organize, and address some of the issues from the ground up from a more grassroots approach is something that exists within our association. So my come up was more in the rank and file, local level organizing spaces. Now, as a person in the state affiliate, inside the institution, trying to understand what kind of resources, levers, systems, cultures, policies either perpetuate or combat institutional racism within our own institutions. And again, are we looking at the local level? Are we looking at the state level? Are we looking more broadly in a national scope? So what are some of the things? In short, and I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, currently we are embarking on a journey where we are doing a lot of self-assessment, and Okaikor has been part of that through her facilitation with Undoing Racism and the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. Right now, we're doing volunteer, it's optional trainings around undoing racism. So first, we're focusing on coalitions of the willing internally to engage in dialogue, build a base, common language, common understanding, and try to, as Okaikor put it, plant the seeds of anti-racism in some of the spaces, and hopefully cultivate that into a community of people that are then finding ways in their relative spaces to combat tactically the inequity that exists. So I'm gonna keep it brief there. There's obviously so much more up under the hood of that, and there's so much more to the story, of course. But I'll pause there and then perhaps find a way back into that if there are more questions that lead us further down that path.
Yeah, but first, thank you though for giving us all that information, and also sort of, you mentioned, you know, community building, right, and grassroots. And I think of sort of this collective being a grassroots sense, you know, first and foremost, including the community in their say. So as school communities and educational institutions look to find their roles in combating racism through social change, what are sort of the offers you can, what can you offer organizers as anti-racist principles to guide their efforts?
So,
may I lean back into, okay.
Oh. We could actually, if you want to add on and build on, I'm good with that. Because y'all are also aware of the principles too as well. So so these principles that I have been organizing around, anti-racist principles that I've been organizing around, come from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And they are a grassroots organization that was started in 1980 by Dr. Jim Dunn, who was a professor at Antioch University, and Ron Chisholm, who was a community organizer who organized fishermen and tenants people and a bunch of stuff too. But Jim was also an organizer too as well, and was activated when Emmett Till, he was activated to act after the murder, the brutal murder of Emmett Till. But as part of their framework, they've created what we use and we kind of organize around as these anti-racist principles, which we believe that, and if we're truly organizing around anti-racism, we're also developing leadership, right? So there's this idea that there's no one leader, right? That also comes from the deep heart and roots of Ella Baker, right? No strong people need one leader, right? So we're developing leadership deep within. You know, we are understanding and undoing racism because we do believe that it's something that can be done, that was done to us and that can be undone, right? And understanding the manifestations of racism, understanding that it also plays out as internalized racial oppression. What does that look like? It's a two-sided coin. It's got racial superiority as it manifests for white people, and internalized inferiority as we see it play out in people of color, right? So, I mean, I can go on, but these principles are what we use as just how we understand. Like we talk about, if we don't understand, and this is what I've been called a few times recently to kind of mediate conflict in different groups that are organizing throughout this, and where I'm close to where I'm living actually. And every time it never fails, every time after I'm digging and I'm building, I'm asking questions, it turns out that there's some internalized playing out where people are fighting for power even within that space, right? And so oftentimes when people are talking about internalized oppression, they're often talking about it as in the context of crabs in a barrel, right? Always like, why is everyone acting like crabs in a barrel? They're always pulling each other down, right? That's what we think about when we're talking about internalized. But the one thing that we often don't do when we're talking about the crabs in the barrel is we don't examine the barrel. Because crabs are not germane to barrel. They don't belong there. How did they get there? Let's start asking some questions. Let's analyze the barrel. Let's analyze the structure. What is it about the structure? What is it about the conditions that's causing them to act this way with each other, right? Right. And so that's what we're talking about. We're like, we need to start understanding how this stuff is living deep within us, because oftentimes people will say, well, it's a systemic oppression. It's the system, right? Well, the system doesn't just operate on its own. It's not some nebulous thing just floating in the air. There are literally people there making the system operate and move, right? They're turning the wheels. If they were like a factory, we would be like keeping it going, and all of us are doing that work. All right, so then part of that work means that we need to be thinking about what is it that's making us keeping the wheels going? What are we doing? What's deep within us that we need to undo? Like we need to excavate that. It's like some kind of colonoscopy. There needs to be like some internalized racial colonoscopy that we need to do with us too as well, right? So how is it playing out in our spaces, and how is it playing out in our communities? How is it playing out in our schools, right? It is, because it is. That's what we need to start thinking about. What are the conditions that's making it play out? You know, we also talk about networking, creating relationships. We can't undo racism if we're not developing relationships. And the other thing too is like, when we are so quick to throw people away in our society, cancel culture, it's cancel, we want to throw people away so quickly. But oftentimes now I've been thinking, this actually I just got from like Amia Mingus, who's like, look, the question I've been asking myself now is like, what are the things I need to take care of this conflict, this fight that I'm actually having with this person or whatever, right? That would also allow me to remain in right relationship with them, right? So I want to address this conflict because it needs to be addressed, but I also want to remain in right relationship with their humanity, right? And so that's, when we're talking about developing relationships, we can't do this, you know, all willy-nilly, just not knowing. And also understanding history. Like we walk into communities ahistorical. You know, Dr. Noguera talked about, look, y'all know what to do. There was research we did years ago. There's history. There's a history of this work. Y'all were doing this. If we go way back, y'all were doing this. There were people that went to Brown University that came out of Teaneck. It's a history of this work. But we walk in like ahistorical, like there's nothing, like this is all new. Like y'all walking in doing this stuff new. What I'm not saying, I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody, but I'm saying that's the way we operate in society. Like we're just the new ones to come along to think of these things when there are people thinking about these things long time ago, right? And we can learn from them. And so let's learn from history. That's almost like this, my dad's from Ghana, and the Sankofa is like, you know, it's the bird, but it's also this African onto-epistemology that's like, it's cultural. Like, you know, we go back and fetch, we turn, we go back in history, we take back that history. We learn from history in order to move forward, right? That's not something that is just, we just say, you know, without any thought. It's really something that we need to learn from, because there's some things that happen that we can build from, that we can grow from, right? That'll help us forge our way forward. There's several more, but that's, you know, the crux of it.
No, thank you for that. When I think of like, and previously mentioned forging forward and gatekeeping and I guess leaders, right? I want to sort of rewind for a second and re-include Gabriel and Amanda and specify teachers unions, right? Because we previously were also talking about NGAA, and how can those unions support these equity-driven changes / initiatives that support student achievements and really help to build restorative and inclusive and culturally responsive school systems?
Absolutely. So I just want to say, you know, in the crabs in a barrel analogy, it's just playing in my mind. I'm like, Eurocentric curriculum is the barrel. Gatekeeping culture is the barrel. What are the many barrels that keep us locked into the system? And I just have to go back, and it will connect to the union, but knowing your history is something that Okaikor said that's also ringing true. You know, in my K through 12 experience, I learned about Ferdinand Magellan discovering the Philippines, right? The Portuguese explorer. I didn't learn about Lapu-Lapu, who was the indigenous chieftain that defeated Magellan in a battle defending his homeland, who's considered an anti-colonial Filipino folk hero. I didn't learn that in school. I learned about the Pilgrims colonizing Plymouth Rock, but I didn't learn about the first Asian migrants, the Filipino sailors that touched the shores of Morro Bay in 1587, 33 years before the Pilgrims. I didn't learn about that history of myself. I learned about the wealthy imperialists, right? I didn't learn about the Filipino farm workers that worked with the Mexican farm workers who didn't even speak the same language to build one of the most successful labor movements in American history, addressing bread and butter issues, talking about collective uplift, grounded in the civil rights struggle. These are not lessons that were embedded into the barrel, right? And that upbringing, that socialization through my whole life was something that I had to try to crawl out of. And it was the union, actually, that I had an opportunity to learn some of the gems that I just described to you. It was in the leadership training opportunities, in the professional development opportunities provided. Right now, the National Education Association, which is the largest labor union in the United States, has just previous election, there was 3 women of color for the first time in our 160-year history. But that's just the positional power piece, right? But in 2015, my first National Representative Assembly, I was there for the first time we passed a policy item that talked about addressing institutional racism, which is, again, the largest labor organization representing 3 million teachers across the country that are now affirming that institutional racism is something that needs to be addressed in public schools. But that's policy and that's leadership. So how do we then organize? And how do we take that policy, that space that we're given to organize at the ground level in the classrooms? How do we start to do the work collectively to unpack some of these things I'm talking about the Philippines, but imagine that the curriculum was as robust and expansive and inclusive of all of the experiences, all of our audience members, perhaps reflecting on your own story, own ancestry, and imagine that it was more inclusive. The union can play a role in that way in supporting racial equity, racial literacy, racial affirmation. And that's one of the things that we're building. And I'll end with this, that the NJEA has leaned into what we're calling the REAL movement, which is an acronym, racial equity, affirmation, and literacy. And I know that we're short on time, so I'll leave it with a teaser to go to real.njea.org just to get a sense of a flavor of what we're trying to build here. So thank you for the space and allowing me to offer that.
I did want to just add also to my own, okay. Real quick is one thing that I'm embarking on that's new for me, but that happens in unions, large unions around the country, is bargaining for the common good. So like the Chicago Teachers Union, the LA, UTLA was a union for teachers in Los Angeles, United Teachers of Los Angeles. They have been going into the community to learn about the needs that help a broader audience. So moving away from just bread and butter issues of teacher salary and health benefits, they're actually considering, hiring staff to help homeless students class size. And I'm sorry, in LA, they're talking about defunding they don't want to open schools until they defund the police, charter schools, among other things. So in Oregon Education Association, they organized around trauma-informed care. So they got all the staff in place within in their school systems. They connected to the community and they won. So when you organize around what's best for the community and not just what's best for the individual schools, everyone wins. So I just wanted to leave that there as part of the tools that unions can offer to help shift educational systems.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for your work. Actually, Chef Naz is gonna actually close us out, but I wanted to let you know that I really felt everything you were saying, and especially going into racial trauma. I did grow up in Teaneck, and I also grew up as a Black woman. There was no hiding it. So there was the whole aspect of misogynoir and staying within this this system. And you so eloquently put understanding my traumas that I didn't really understand at that time. So now growing up, I'm glad that we can look back and have that Sankofa ideology and really grow from it and progress. So thank you all so much for speaking. Thank you for the NJEA and to EduSage. You all are wonderful, and keep doing it because there's so much to be done. Get it done. Thank you.
Thank you everybody for lifting up our community tonight. And obviously this conversation is to be continued. We were going to do a round of final thoughts, but we're really out of time. I'm not sure if Shanaz is coming back on.
Here.
Yep,
I'm here.
Thank you, everybody.
So I'd like to thank everyone. I would like to especially recognize some of the elected officials that we have who joined tonight. Councilwoman Javon Rice, Board of Education board members, Clara Williams, Victoria Fisher, Denise Sanders, and Linda Burns. Also would like to special thanks to all the speakers we had tonight, the panelists, the moderators, and fantastic job by the students. Thank you all. And special thanks to Mary Joyce Lakey and Alexandra Cervanio Torres from Teaneck Democratic Municipal Committee. And also next town hall is going to focus on racism in elections and voting, which is in before mid-September. We will schedule that, and we will put that on our Coalition to Unite Teaneck page. You will see it on social media, or send us an email at uniteteaneck@gmail.com, and we'll keep you informed. These monthly town halls is to address racism, and we need to work together to address it. Also would like to introduce 3 Board of Education candidates who are on the call tonight, and actually you see them all lined up here. You've met Yusra Subhani. Earlier she moderated the session. And we have, let me see if I can find, so Danielle, yes. And Clara Williams, who's our current Board of Ed member incumbent, who's also running for Board of Education. Everybody knows election is November 3rd. Got that date marked down really well. So, and then Danielle G, running for the Board of Ed. So there are 9 people that are running for the Board of Education. Just wanted to share with you the candidates who joined tonight. There's 3 of them of the 9 who have joined for this session tonight. So I want to thank everybody, and please keep an eye out for the next month's town hall, racism in elections and voting. It'll be mid-September, so please keep an eye out for it and tell everybody about it. Join and make sure we register people to vote November 3rd. Keep that, mark that date. Vote whichever way you can. Vote by mail, vote in person, but please vote and tell everybody. Thank you all, and we thank all the sponsors who joined us also. Thank you all, and have a great evening.